Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Wherever you are in the world, welcome and thank you for joining us. My name is Carl Anthony, and this is AutoVision News live at AutoSens Detroit 2023. We are set up in the heart of the Motor City, downtown Detroit at the Huntington Place. With us is Wade Appleman. Now, Wade has extensive experience holding leadership roles in both private and public sector organizations. Wade has led sales and marketing efforts for 5 venture-backed startups, with a total exit valuations of $900 million. He also helped launch several companies, including Sensel, which is where I first met Wade. And Sensel was acquired by onsemi in 2018. And at onsemi, Wade was the GM of the depth sensing division. Today, he is the CMO, Chief Marketing Officer of Owl Autonomous Imaging. Wade, good to talk to you again.
Great to see you again and live and in person.
No
more of the virtual stuff.
No more of the virtual stuff.
Yeah, we did a lot of those. So.
We did a lot of those, and I think that was the last time we spoke.
Right.
And I saw your update on LinkedIn about joining Owl. Congratulations, by the way. Super cool.
Yeah.
Tell us about Owl Autonomous Imaging. What do you do? Give us the overview.
Sure. So Owl Autonomous Imaging is a thermal computer vision company. Okay. So what does that mean?
Yes.
and where is Owl? So first of all, just a little bio piece on Owl.
Yeah.
So we're a newer company, founded about 3.5 years ago by experts in thermal imaging and computer vision. So that's the pedigree of the company.
Yep.
Today, our headquarters is in Rochester, New York. There's a lot of heritage in image sensing out of the former Kodak locations there. So a really good ecosystem there. And we have offices now throughout the United States where we've brought in a lot of folks from a wide range of industries. We're about 50 people.
Awesome. Let's talk about long wave infrared. And for our viewers, you'll sometimes see this abbreviated as LWIR. LWIR, long wave infrared. Now, long wave infrared thermal imaging. First, a two-part question, Wade. First, what is it? How does it work? And the million-dollar question: why is it an important vision sensing modality for this space?
Sure. So it's really important to understand the different wavelengths of how the various sensors work.
Right.
And you've heard, for instance, LiDAR, you'll hear the term, well, LiDARs run at 905 nanometers or 1550 nanometers. You'll hear vision cameras that are called RGB cameras or need visible light cameras. Those are in the visible light spectrum, which is generally between 500 nanometers and 700 nanometers. That's where they're getting their information to populate the sensor, keeping it really dirt simple here. What long wave infrared refers to is the region of the light spectrum, if you will, that the camera is seeing.
Right.
And in our case, we're seeing thermoelectric energy. Okay, so we're not seeing light at all.
Okay.
Thermoelectric energy or radiation that's coming from objects that emit at 8,000 nanometers to 14,000 nanometers.
Right.
Okay, so at a wavelength that's 8,000 to 14,000 nanometers is where we're getting our information to populate the data in our sensor.
Got it.
And that's the thermoelectro spectrum, if you will.
Yes. Got it. Let's do some myth busting. Okay.
Sure.
What are some of the myths around long wave infrared?
Sure.
Are they true? Are they false? Let's set the record straight.
Right. So let's even step back before we do some of that when we talk about what long wave infrared looks like. So this is a camera. If you look at this, you will see it looking just like a traditional camera. Okay, so it has a lens, it has an image sensor or focal plane array behind that lens. But unlike a camera, if the lights totally turn off, let's just pretend that every light in the Huntington Place went out right now.
Got it.
Every image sensor, this camera would go dark. Okay, you can't see it.
Yes.
But if you're looking at wavelength at the long wave infrared wavelength, you would actually see a grayscaled image of exactly what's happening here. it was really the domain of the defense industry for lots and lots of years.
Gotcha.
Okay,
Yep.
so long wave infrared, the real value of long wave infrared is it sees when there's zero light, and I'm talking 0 lux. Okay, now conversely, it also sees in really, really bright lights. Okay, so one of the challenging scenarios that everybody always talks about in driving, and you always see these demos here, is you're coming out of a tunnel,
Yes.
and there's shadows as you come out of the tunnel, and you don't know if there's a workman on the other side of the tunnel that you're about to run into because your sensor is blinded.
Correct, yes.
Thermoelectric energy at that wavelength doesn't get affected by that glare. So it can see through the glare. So we see in complete darkness and in high glare environments, chaotic and urban environments. And since it's a camera, it has a really nice wide field of view,
Right.
okay, that's based on the lens you're putting on it. And it's just, it adapts into the vehicle system just the way a camera does. It's just another form of camera, just operating at that wavelength.
That is cool.
Yeah,
That's the application to automotive.
That is exactly right. So what
Yeah.
we're working towards is how do we enable, how do we give sensors to the suite of sensors that are there? No, we're not trying to replace RGB cameras. RGB cameras give you color information.
Sure.
You need to see a stop sign.
Yes.
You need to see a color of a stop light.
Right.
They're always cheap. There are going to be a lot of them.
Yes.
Okay, so that's a sensor that'll always be there. And those sensors are used for something called object classification. Okay, so they're used for classification. We will always have radar in a car because they're really, really good at doing detection of objects,
Right.
and they can determine range really, really well. So they're used for detection and ranging. Cameras are usually used for classification.
Right.
Okay, so what is it? Person, place, or a thing?
Yes.
Because it has enough points on target to really know who it is.
Right. Right.
LiDAR has come on board, and I've evangelized LiDAR for a lot of years, started I think in 2016.
This is true,
So
yeah.
I'm a real believer in the advantage of LiDAR. But you have to remember that LiDAR is really like radar. It's really good at doing object detection,
Yes.
but it doesn't have enough points on target to do classification.
Right.
The classification is the mode of vision systems, which are cameras.
Right.
But again, at the middle of the night, when LiDARs can really do well because they're emitting light,
Yes.
okay, or
Yes.
radar, which are emitting radio waves,
Yes.
okay, that all requires a return signal. We don't need that return signal, so we work in perfect darkness, bright lights,
Right.
and we're going to either complement LiDAR systems, or eventually maybe some of the LiDARs won't be used in as many use cases they're envisioned,
Right.
because now one of those use cases was dark night scenarios,
Right.
and it may not be as needed as much as thermal comes more into mainstream.
Right.
But you asked a question about myths.
Well, that's the thing. But now that I have a better understanding of this, Wade, and the application to automotive, and driving. I mean, there's a tunnel as you come to Huntington Place. I mean, most attendees probably drove through the huge tunnel underneath there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're talking real world stuff.
Right.
Now that we have the full understanding, let's do the myth busting.
Sure.
What are some myths around this long wave infrared thermal imaging? Are they true? Are they not true? Again, let's set the record
Yeah,
straight.
so we've been having some fun with the myth busting
Yeah,
stuff. Our ad here today was a Mythbusters ad with
I saw that.
with the ghost car and stuff like that. So we're definitely having some fun with this. And one of the first things, everybody thinks that it senses heat.
Yes,
okay,
right.
It's a thermal camera. That's what long wave infrared stands for, is thermal cameras. And during COVID, you remember we walked in and we all had our temperature taken.
Yes, yes.
That was a thermal camera.
Right.
Okay, but it didn't have a lot of pixels in it, very cheap, and it would never have been able to work in an automobile environment. Those are sort of temperature sensors.
Yes.
But the one thing is that, well, let's take a simple one. I won't see you if I'm in a 98.6 degree day in Detroit, because it won't pick it up, because you're going to blend into the background.
Right.
Totally false.
Right.
It doesn't work that way. I don't want to get into the gory details of how the tech works, but simply said, false. It will see you, a person on a 98.6 degree day. Conversely, will it work in the bitter cold? Will it work in the snow? Will it work in the fog? And the answer is everything changes relative to each other.
Okay.
So we will be able to absolutely see, it does see in the snow, the rain, the fog, and frankly, it doesn't get it doesn't get challenged by rain and fog,
Right.
where, for instance, LiDAR has a real challenge in heavy rain because those return photons are getting scattered
Yes.
in rain or fog. We see through that. It's basically transparent to
Right.
us.
Right.
So that is a myth. Another really big myth, and we've already sort of talked about it, is does it need light or how does it work? So
Yes.
we've explained that already. The other is that it's expensive, okay? And the answer is it had been expensive. And I think the word had been is really key.
Yeah.
If we think about LiDAR back in 2016, I'm going to trick you for a second.
Okay.
What was the cost of a LiDAR system in 2016? Do you remember what we were talking about, those big Velodyne spinning LiDARs, what those things cost?
I don't remember.
It was about $64,000 was the price of that LiDAR system.
Okay.
That was the entry price. And everybody sort of said, well, we need LiDAR, but we got to get the cost down. How are we going to do it? And that's why, frankly, billions of dollars were invested in LiDAR companies to cost reduce the value of the LiDAR system.
Right.
And even though they had very expensive components, through a lot of great engineering, we were able to get those down today to about $5,000 is kind of what the price is.
Right.
Most of these companies are public with their pricing now.
Right.
They're all trying to get down to sub 1,000, maybe 500.
Yep.
That's as low as they're going to get forever.
Right.
And they all had to have huge investments to build up their factories in order to accomplish that. Thermal imaging is starting at a very different price point. We're not starting a thermal camera did not start at $64,000.
Right.
It's probably started about $20,000. So not great. But that was sort of the entry point of a camera a few years ago because they were really designed for military.
Right.
Over the last few years, we've started to see a few companies that have focused on thermal start to get these cameras down to a few $1,000s.
Yes.
What we have done at OWL is we're building both what's called the focal plane array, which is the sensor, the semiconductor sensor that's detecting that thermoelectric energy.
Right.
We're building the chip.
Right.
Okay. And we're building the camera core, it's called, and the camera that ultimately builds that camera. Right. So we're taking all of the learning techniques we had by building what's called a digital focal plane array, putting it into a camera, and we think that we can get these costs of these cameras down, depending on the resolution, between less than $100 for a thermal camera in level 2 PAB, which is a real strategic price point to bring thermal into pedestrian and automatic braking. There's a price point you have to hit to get into that app.
Sure.
And then when you're in more of the level 3 autonomous space, we think that these cameras in volume later in this decade can be produced for in that $300, $350 price to the OEM.
Right. Now
there's a lot of work that has to happen on that, but our contribution to that is really the digital focal plane array, and then working with the supplier ecosystem to build lower cost lenses and things like that are needed. And once we hit these volumes, we've done a lot of analysis and feel that that's really realistic. So the prediction is that long wave infrared is going to total myth bust out that this is costly. You also get a lot of resolution now by what we're doing. The other problem that had happened is the resolution of these sensors had been too small to be realistic, sort of VGA resolution, 640 by 480 pixels, just not enough points on target. We're doing an HD version of this, 1200 by 800 pixels, so a much better pixel resolution, lower cost. And we think that that's where we'll get to. Then on top of that, the other challenge is how do you make it integrate into the thermal? How do you integrate thermal into the AI perception stacks?
Right.
And you have to do a lot of neural network training. And so we've spent time helping our customers work on computer vision algorithms for classification, ranging, and segmentation and fusion. The really tough things to do on thermal.
Right. Wait, I had a question in my notes actually about that object classification and ranging. If we've covered it in so many words, but allow me to ask it again because it is in my notes. How can computer vision be made even better then for object classification and ranging when using thermal.
Great.
You know.
Yeah, so let's bring it home. Let's bring it real.
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the scenarios that we highlight often, there's two kind of, let's call it simple use cases.
Okay.
All right, to really understand. You're driving down the road,
Okay.
and there's a pedestrian that is sort of outside the peripheral view of the headlights, outside of the field of view of the headlight.
Got it.
Okay, they're on a sidewalk, for instance. They may be walking towards a crosswalk.
Sure.
A thermal imaging system can see that pedestrian that much faster. So they can classify it and say, oh, that's a pedestrian. It's not just something that's there. It's not just a bus stop,
A sign
hut or something like that. It's or a mannequin standing there. It's a real human. Can't be, it's like a pedestrian walking down the street at night in heat is like wearing a retro-reflective vest walking down the street. They can be in total black clothing, but they pop instantly in a thermal image compared to an RGB image, and you know exactly who they are within your wide field of view.
Yes.
So you can classify and then predict, are this person walking away from the car, away so that I have to worry about it, or are they on a trajectory? Think about your own eyes during the daylight. You're figuring out the trajectory going to a person about to cross the street. So classification in thermal is something that helps outside of the cone of light, or a biker coming up coming towards you on a dark, windy road. You'll see it. But now just think about the other example of a deer. I mean, there's fun fact. The U.S. insurance industry has paid $1.2 billion a year in claims for deer strikes. It's one of the reasons one of our investors is State Farm Insurance.
I can believe now that I can believe that.
So they too sort of see, hey, how can we solve a very big problem where, how many times have you driven down a country road and you see a deer just sort of jump out in front of you? You can see that very clearly. The systems can see the deer outside of your field of view. And we already talked about the bright light scenario for classification. So it really does help tremendously.
Where I grew up, Wade, and even to when Danielle and I travel to see her parents, we drive through rural areas of Michigan. And one thing, when you grow up in a rural area, you learn seeing one deer is not the same as seeing them all, because deer are herd animals. So, what you're talking about is I might see one deer, but I might not see necessarily the other deer. You're talking about a full spectrum where I've got eyes on the deer, or I've got eyes on other animals, or I've got eyes on other pedestrians that, eyes in the sense that my car has eyes on them, because I'm limited in my vision.
We have had what they called night vision in cameras in the past using thermal imaging. But it was a little bit, frankly, I hate to say it, it was a vanity feature in high-end vehicles, and it wasn't tied to the braking system. It's still not tied to the braking system. So you can go and buy a high-end car, and they might give you the option of night vision. But all it's really doing is it's showing up on your dashboard or heads-up display saying, oh, there's something there. It may give you it might give you a little beep tone. But it's not tied into the self-driving systems for sure. And it's not also, I don't know of a single system today in the market using thermal tied into the braking system. So it might say there's a deer, but then oops, I hit it. So hate to be that dramatic, but that's about a possibility.
Game-changing stuff, Wade. Last question before we wrap up. Trends on the horizon. Is there anything that you see maybe coming down the pipe that we should be aware of or paying attention to?
Yeah, I think we're going to obviously continue to see consolidation in the industry, and I think that understanding how that's going to affect the entire supply chain. And it could just be consolidation at the chip level. Some of these companies use semiconductors from even established companies that are being washed out or not viable anymore, or have been viewed as too expensive, so they get replaced. And what's the impact of that? So I think we're going to continue to see supplier consolidation. I think that though we shouldn't be scared of that either, because there's often things that come out that are new that can replace things. And I don't want to. I mean, I've already sort of made my commercial a little bit for long wave infrared, but I do think that is a trend that we may play this video back in 5 years and they'll either say, who's Wade? Forgot all about Wade. What a dope he was.
We won't forget about you.
Or they could come back and they say, you know, this was sort of the continuation. I'm not saying I'm on the forefront of,
Sure.
of long-wave infrared.
Sure.
It's been talked about for
Sure.
a lot of years, but I
Right.
think we are starting to see a real tipping point where we're seeing OEMs come out with RFQs for this technology.
Right.
And today there's just a handful of long-wave infrared companies.
Right.
And I think maybe like LiDAR, you'll start to see a lot more interest in pop there.
I think you have a good track record, my friend.
Thank you very much.
We'll see where we're at in 5 years,
Yeah.
but I've got faith in you and Owl Autonomous Imaging.
Thank you.
Of course, want to encourage our LinkedIn viewers to connect with Wade, connect with Owl Autonomous Imaging. Both are tagged in the post that accommodates this video. Reach out to Wade for more myth busting on what we've been talking about, long wave infrared thermal imaging. Wade, thank you for your
Carl,
time.
great talking to you again. I look forward to it.
Always a pleasure. We'll do this again soon. More to come in the meantime from AutoSens Detroit here on our AutoVision News LinkedIn page. From the Huntington Place in downtown Detroit, I'm Carl Anthony, AutoVision News.